I was born with a curiosity to explore the realms of darkness, to seek out the elusive shadows and question their existence, their never-ending convolution with the light. All things were born from this darkness.
Six Flags Over Georgia, Austell, Georgia. Since opening in 1967, Six Flags Over Georgia has been a hotbed for paranormal activity. Built along the Chattahoochee River, the park is haunted by the spirits of the past. On opening day, an actor named Joe was to star in the first theatrical show at the Crystal Pistol Music Hall in Six Flags. He was in a car accident on his way to work and died. Ever since, people have been seeing the apparition of Joe at the music hall. Some have seen him in the balcony, watching the performers. He is often heard singing after closing time. Theater props are often moved and sometimes found outside on the railroad tracks that go along the theater. Further along the train tracks is the Lick Skillet Train Trestle Bridge. The trestle stretches over the park, and many claim to see figures walking along the bridge near dusk. The figures are dressed in early 1800s attire and are seen so clearly and so often that park-goers often mistake them for a theatrical show. The picnic pavilion is said to be haunted. People hear children laughing and playing near the pavilion and the surrounding woods. The Riverview Carousel was placed on the National Register of Historic Places by the United States Department of Interior for its historical significance. It was moved from Riverview Park in Chicago to Six Flags, Georgia in 1972. Strange things have been happening ever since. Midnight cleaning crews have witnessed the carousel starting up on its own. The lights come on, music plays, and it starts to go around. On a few rare occasions, the carousel has even been seen going backwards, with a small figure riding the outermost black horse. In the early 70s, a 9-year-old girl with blonde hair was hit by a car at the Emeco gas station right outside the park. She is often seen asking for help in the parking lot. When park-goers try to help her, she disappears. On July 18, 1989, an 11-year-old boy was found unresponsive after riding the Z-Force. Park staff performed CPR on the boy, but it was too late. Although an autopsy was performed, the cause of the boy's death remains unknown. On May 26, 2002, a park foreman was hit in the head and killed after entering a restricted area. July 27, 2006, a 45-year-old died of heart failure while riding the Goliath attraction. A 17-year-old boy was decapitated on June 28, 2008, after climbing 2 fences and entering a restricted area. Hurricane Harbor was opened on May 29, 2014. It was an exciting day for 14-year-old Latrika Freeman. As the wave pool opened, Latrika and her sister ran in and enjoyed the new attraction. Shortly after opening, the wave pool had to be evacuated to add additional chemicals to decrease the smell of chlorine. People complained of breathing problems and irritated eyes. The commercial wave pool uses a mixture of sulfuric acid and hypochlorite solution to disinfect the pools. The mixture has to be perfectly mixed, or else it becomes chlorine gas. The wave pool reopened later that day. Latrika Freeman fell ill that night. For 2 months, Freeman went from doctor to doctor, but all misdiagnosed her. Latrika died July 18, 2014. So many terrible things have happened at the park that locals think the park is cursed by the Muskogee Native Americans. When the site was chosen, little care was taken to the ancient burial mounds that surrounded the area. Contractors decimated years of history to build Six Flags Over Georgia. Surrency House, Surrency, Georgia. In the early 1850s, pioneer Allen Powell Surrency purchased a small patch of land near the Macon-Brunswick Railway line and settled in Georgia. By 1911, the town of Surrency, Georgia was incorporated into the United States. Allen Surrency, his wife, and their 11 children were a typical pioneering family. The Surrencys were known as hard workers and were well respected by their peers. Perfectly stationed along the railroad, the home became an inn to tired travelers. For 20 years, the house was restful, alive with the ardor of daily living. On November 17, 1872, 15-year-old Annie Clementine Surrency was sitting on the edge of the property near the railroad station, waiting for her father to return. The train was late, leaving an anxious Annie waiting in the dark. A figure came out of nowhere and walked toward her. This made her uneasy, so she retreated back to the safety of her front porch. As she reached the stairs, an object was hurled past her head, barely missing her. She turned around to confront the figure, but it had vanished. This was quite unnerving, since the property was open land and there was nowhere the man could have disappeared to. He was just gone. Terrified, Annie ran into the house. She hurried through the parlor and past some gentlemen that were guests of her father's that were also awaiting his arrival. Among them were Reverend Benjamin Blitch, Colonel Roberts, Mr. Surrency's brother, and a few other men. None of them noticed the items falling all around the girl as she rushed through the house. It wasn't until she reached her mother in the kitchen that the men heard the commotion. As they entered the kitchen, they witnessed items being violently thrown around the room. Mr. Surrency arrived at 9 p.m., his home a circus of commotion and excitement. The Reverend fled the house as soon as he saw the flying objects, but the rest of the people in the Surrency house were all together in the parlor when Mr. Surrency arrived. As they recounted the events they witnessed, a glass vase smashed violently to the floor, startling Mr. Surrency. By the morning of October 19th, there was nothing else to destroy, so the house fell silent. Later that evening, after a crowd of neighbors gathered to witness the activity, it began again. Witnesses watched in bewilderment as items appeared out of nowhere and fell to the ground. There was so much debris flying around that you couldn't tell where any of it was coming from. It was just there, chaotic and perplexing. In the days following, reporters show up to investigate the alleged activity. A brick fell between two of the reporters and broke in half. The reporter picked up the brick and dropped it immediately. The brick was so hot it scalded his hand. Word traveled, and by that evening, 75 people had turned up to witness the haunted Surrency house. While the reporter remained as a guest at the Surrency house, he witnessed 500 spectators come and go from the property. In true Southern hospitality, the Surrency family never asked a cent from the people coming to see the phenomenon, and had a bed and warm meal waiting for most who stopped by. But things quickly got out of hand. The children were being attacked, pulled from their beds and tormented. On November 20th, 1872, Mrs. Surrency and her daughter Annie fled the house to stay with neighbors. The Surrency house fell silent, but across the yard at the Patterson home where Mrs. Surrency and her daughter fled, things were continuing. The Pattersons believed it had followed the Surrencys. As things crashed around them, the Pattersons asked the Surrencys to leave. Annie was able to stay, but as soon as her mother left, the activity stopped. Wherever Mrs. Surrency was, the activity followed. The Surrencys moved away soon after, leaving all their belongings behind. The activity continued, but died down after leaving the Surrency house. When his son asked him why he had abandoned the house, Mr. Surrency answered, quote, "The house is truly accursed, and from this day none of us shall ever enter here again," unquote. The Surrencys have never returned. Lake Lanier, Forsyth County, Georgia. In 1956, the United States destroyed 50,000 acres and displaced 250 families to construct Lake Lanier, named after Confederate soldier Sidney Lanier, to provide water and power to Atlanta, Georgia. Families whom were displaced, most of which were farmers, watched as generations of family memories disappeared beneath the raging waters of the Chattahoochee River. Along with memories and years of culture, 20 cemeteries were among that buried beneath the lake, loved ones forever lost in its murky depths. The small town of Oscarville, Georgia, was among the hardest hit by the development of the lake. In 1912, a white woman was found raped and beaten near Oscarville. At the time, Oscarville was a predominantly black community. Most of those living in Oscarville were former slaves whom were granted release after they fought for their freedom during the Civil War. Georgia was still recovering from the effects of the Atlanta race riots that happened 6 years earlier. Tensions were high, and the discovery of the woman, whom died shortly after, only exacerbated the situation. 2 young men were blamed for the woman's death. 16-year-old Ernest Knox was having a normal day at home with his family when police stormed the child's house and arrested him for the murder of the raped woman. The 16-year-old was coerced to admit to killing the woman. They made him watch in horror as a mob of angry whites subjected him to a mock lynching. While in jail, a lynch mob broke into the jailhouse and tried to hang young Ernest Knox. Officers were able to evasively slip Knox out the back and transferred him to a safer jail. The following day, 3 more blacks from Oscarville were detained and charged as accomplices. 24-year-old Robert Edwards, 16-year-old Oscar Daniel, and his sister, 22-year-old Trussie Daniel, were arrested and taken to the county jail to await trial. It wasn't long after that a mob of 2,000 whites overtook the county jail, gaining access to the cells. They beat, shot, and killed 24-year-old Robert Edwards in his cell, drug his body through the town square, and hung him from a telephone pole. Charges against Trussie Daniel were dropped. 16-year-old Oscar Daniel and 16-year-old Ernest Knox were found guilty by an all-white jury the first day of trial. Public hangings in Georgia were illegal at the time, but despite this, an estimated 8,000 racist whites showed up to taunt the boys and their grieving families in their final hours. By the following year, a group of white supremacists formed a terrorist group known as the Night Riders. Within a few years, the Night Riders had terrorized and ran off every black person in Forsyth County. The black communities, consisting of 1,100 people, left everything behind: their homes, memories, their land. In the years following, white farmers encroached and stole the abandoned farms and sold it to make Lake Lanier, burying the dark history of Forsyth County. Or so they thought. Beneath the depths of Lake Lanier lies the remnants of the past. Homes long demolished bear only their foundations. Roads and sidewalks wind along the lake bottom. A sunken church holds relics of religious faith and hope. The dead lay buried 160 feet beneath the lake in forgotten graveyards. Every year, Lake Lanier adds an average of 20 victims to its death tally. Since its completion in 1957, there have been over 600 deaths at Lake Lanier, making it one of the deadliest in the United States. There have been 200 that have died since 1994. Tragedy and bad luck have occurred so frequently that locals consider the lake cursed. People who have survived almost drowning in Lake Lanier report that it felt as if something was dragging them, pulling them under. Of the over 600 deaths, 27 bodies have never been recovered. They lie at the bottom of Lake Lanier, forgotten in time along with the cemeteries of years past and the once thriving town of Oscarville. In 1958, Delia Parker Young and Susie Roberts lost control of their car on the Jerry Jackson Bridge after speeding away from a gas pump without paying. They slipped silently into Lake Lanier without anyone noticing. A year and a half later, a badly decomposed and bloated body was found by some fishermen fishing Lake Lanier. Locals knew the remains were that of Delia because she had been seen wandering around the Jerry Jackson Bridge since the night she disappeared, still wearing the blue dress she disappeared in, but missing both her hands. She was seen so often, the locals named her the Lady of the Lake. However, her body was so badly decomposed, coroners were unable to identify her. In 1990, 3 decades after the body was recovered from the lake, construction crews working on the Jerry Jackson Bridge discovered the 1954 Ford model car the girls were last seen in. Within the car were the remains of Susie Roberts, whom was identified by dental records. The identity of the Lady of the Lake was, in fact, Delia Parker Young. She is still seen roaming the bridge and is often blamed for the mishaps and accidents that happen at Lake Lanier. Chickamauga Battlefield, Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. The Chickamauga Battlefield was the second bloodiest battlefield in the Civil War, second only to the Battle of Gettysburg. The battlefield was named for its position along the Chickamauga River. The area was steeped in tragedy long before the war. The native Cherokee named the Chickamauga River. Chickamauga translates to River of Death, since the area was hit with a deadly string of smallpox brought on by the invasion of the Europeans. By the 1600s, 90% of the indigenous American population, 55 million natives, had perished due to smallpox and the violence of war. In the early morning hours of September 18, 1863, Confederate General Bushrod Johnson marched his division into a Union brigade at Reed's Bridge, thus beginning the battle at Chickamauga. For 2 days, both Union and Confederate troops fought endlessly for control of the territory. The Confederates managed to seize control of the battlefield, pushing Union soldiers north. Although a victory for the Confederates, the casualties were immense, with 18,454 Confederate casualties and 16,107 Union casualties. The sounds of the Civil War are often heard echoing throughout the battlefield to this day. It's common to hear the thunderous cacophony of gunshots and cannon fire. The haunting cries of wounded and dying soldiers can be heard all along the Chickamauga River, their echoed screams carried along the water. Eerie light manifestations are often reported on the battlefield during the day and night. Many believe these to be the lantern of loved ones looking for their dead. The apparition of a woman in a long white flowing dress is often seen roaming in and out of the tombstones, carefully reading each one she passes before disappearing into the woods. Another apparition that haunts the battlefield is that of the Headless Horseman, believed to be the restless spirit of Lieutenant Colonel Julius Garesh, whom was decapitated accidentally by a cannonball. General William Hazen came upon the headless body. In his report, he wrote, quote, "I saw but a headless trunk. An eddy of crimson foam had issued where the head had been. I at once recognized his figure. It lay so naturally, his right hand across his breast. As I approached, dismounted, and bent over him, the contraction of a muscle extended his hand slowly and slightly towards me. Taking hold of it, I found it still warm and lifelike." Unquote. The Headless Horseman is seen riding his horse across the battlefield and is sometimes seen as a floating head in search of his body. There's a terrifying creature that lurks within the woods and on the battlefield. It is known as Old Green Eyes and is the most famous ghost that haunts the battlefield. Described as part human, part beast, the creature is known as a bipedal with long dark hair that goes down to its waist and intense glowing green eyes. Some accounts describe the hair billowing intensely, even though there is no wind. Although accounts of the creature have been told in early Native American stories, the creature was sighted in the aftermath of the battle at Chickamauga. Among the dead soldiers, loved ones carefully traversed the bloody field in search of their kin. As night fell, those still in search of the dead would bear witness to the green-eyed monster, looming above them on a hill, as if silently observing their misery. In 1981, Chickamauga National Battlefield Ranger Edward Tinney observed the creature on his way to check on a group of battlefield reenactors. He described the following, quote, "I saw a tall figure, over 6 feet in height, walking toward me. It seemed human, but at the same time it wasn't. It had shaggy, stringy, waist-length black hair, green eyes, and pointed teeth that resembled fangs. Feeling extremely threatened by this presence, I quickly crossed to the other side of the road. As he or it walked by me, he suddenly turned and kind of smiled, but it was a very devilish sort of grin. At that moment, a car came down the road, and as its headlights hit the figure, it vanished right before my eyes." Unquote. The creature was spotted again in the 1970s on 2 separate occasions. Both incidents involved crashed motorists who swerved to avoid hitting a human-like green-eyed monster. The Ellis Hotel, Atlanta, Georgia. The Ellis Hotel was built in 1913 as the Weinkauf Hotel. It was the tallest building in Atlanta at the time, towering 15 stories above the Atlanta landscape. At 3:15 a.m. on December 7, 1946, people started waking up to the sounds of screaming as hallways began to fill with smoke. Though it isn't 100% certain, investigators felt the fire began on the 3rd floor after a match was accidentally dropped onto a mattress. The first call for help came in 27 minutes later from the hotel's night manager. Firefighters were on the scene within seconds, but people were already throwing themselves from the windows to escape the heat and smoke. 385 firefighters were battling the fire, trying to save the people trapped above the 3rd floor. As they pulled people from windows, bodies were falling down on them, injuring many. One firefighter described looking up through the smoke and seeing screaming people raining down upon him. The ladders on the fire trucks only extended to the 8th floor. Another ladder was set across the roof of the adjacent building to save people on the 10th floor. Desperate attempts were made by those higher up as they fashioned ropes of whatever they could find to try to lower themselves to safety. Many fell to their deaths. A mother with 2 children were trapped on the 7th floor. As the flames ignited her nightgown, she tossed her 2 children into the air in hopes they would be caught. A reporter witnessed the tragedy and wrote an article about what he saw. An excerpt of the article is as follows, quote, Her nightgown shone white against the flames behind her as she stood on the window ledge high above the street. The net, too, caught fire. She jumped, but she missed the net stretched by the firemen. She landed astride overhead wires. There she hung in flames. Finally, her body broke loose and toppled to the ground." Unquote. A firefighter barely manages to rescue a woman clinging to her windowsill on the 5th floor. He caught her as she lost her grip. As he guided her down the ladder to safety, a woman plunged from a higher floor, landing on both the firefighter and the woman he rescued. All 3 fell to their deaths. Trying to escape the flames, many tried to jump the 10-foot gap between the buildings. Bodies of those whom jumped were piling up in the alley. A survivor recalls jumping and making it across while others fell around them. Witnesses watched in horror as a young boy jumped from the 15th floor and managed to grab and hold onto one of the ladders. He survived the fall with only a broken foot, but lost his mother and sisters in the raging fire above. A man held a shaking wife in the lobby as they were being rescued. As they walked out, a person fell to their death on the ground in front of them. Of the 304 hotel occupants, 119 died, including Mr. and Mrs. Weinkauf, the builders of the hotel. The hell experienced on the inside of the building was far worse. When the Weinkauf Hotel was opened, it was advertised as a fireproof hotel because of its structure being built by stone and iron. However, the inner walls of the building were made up of highly flammable materials. All 15 floors were serviced by only one exit. The only stairwell that led to the exit from all 15 floors was becoming crammed with people trying to get to the bottom. Black smoke seeped into the top of the stairwell, suffocating those at the top, while air rushing in from open doors and windows caused the fire to spread rapidly. The stairwell became a sort of chimney flue, attracting all the fire and smoke. It was impossible to see through the smoke as bodies of terrified people swam violently through one another, trying to escape the burning inferno. To date, the Weinkauf Hotel fire is the deadliest hotel fire in U.S. history. 32 people jumped to their deaths or failed trying to escape. The rest died of asphyxiation and burns, or from injuries sustained by falling bodies. 6 years after the fire, in an attempt to hide its dark past, new management reconstructed the building and renamed it the Peachtree Hotel, but to no avail. The hotel would not succeed. The building saw a wide variety of characters as it changed ownership time and time again. In 2007, the building was once again open to the public as the Ellis Hotel. Since its opening, people have been reporting strange things. Many claim to smell smoke throughout the hotel, and some have even heard screams echoing through the hallways. The hotel comes alive at 2:48 a.m., the exact time the fire started. People report hearing screams and banging on their doors. Elevators seem to work on their own. The hotel phone rings at 2:48 a.m., but there is never anyone on the other end when answered. For years, even during its abandonment, people reported seeing faces in the upper windows of the hotel. Many whom have stayed at the Ellis Hotel have corroborated these sightings. Countless witnesses have seen the terrified and screaming faces staring back at them from their windows when they look over the Atlanta landscape.